Winter on the Nebraska frontier arrived like Judgment Day in the winter of 1878, swift, merciless, and with no regard for the souls caught in its fury. Hannah Woodson watched from her cabin window as the first flakes descended, gentle as goose down, but harbingers of something far more severe. By nightfall, the wind howled around her homestead's rough-hewn logs like a pack of hungry wolves, and snow piled against the north wall in drifts taller than a man. Hannah pressed her palm against the cold glass, remembering her father's words 3 years earlier when they'd first arrived at this desolate stretch of prairie. "This land has teeth, girl, but we'll outlast it." He hadn't outlasted it in the end. The Nebraska soil that had promised them a new beginning now held his remains, marked by a wooden cross she'd carved herself, nearly visible from her window when the prairie grass wasn't covered in snow. Hannah was 22, but the plains had aged her beyond her years. Her face, once soft with youth, had been weathered by 3 winters alone on this claim. 160 acres secured through the Homestead Act, and her late father's dreams. The mirror hanging on the cabin wall, a luxury she'd insisted on bringing from their previous life in Kansas, reflected a woman with skin prematurely lined from squinting against sun and wind, and eyes that had seen too much for their years. Her chestnut hair, once her pride, now hung in a simple braid down her back, more practical than pretty. Calloused hands gripped a wool shawl around narrow shoulders as she added another log to the stone fireplace. The flames licked upward, casting flickering shadows across the sparse furnishings. A table her father had built from cottonwood, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner covered with every quilt she owned, and shelves lined with the precious few books she'd salvaged from their life before. On the wall hung her father's old Kentucky long rifle, and beneath it, in a cedar box, lay her mother's silver hairbrush and wedding band, all that remained of a woman 8 years dead. The storm showed no signs of abating. Wind moaned through the cabin's chinked logs, finding every gap in the mud and straw sealant Hannah had applied in autumn. She had spent weeks preparing for winter, stocking the root cellar with vegetables from her garden, smoking meat, collecting and chopping enough wood to last until spring. Experience had taught her that on the frontier, preparation wasn't just prudence, it was survival. Even at dusk, Hannah ventured out to check on her 2 milk cows and the horse, Samson, who stomped nervously in the small barn she'd built with her own hands after her father passed in their first summer. She wrapped a scarf around her lower face before stepping outside, the cold stealing her breath despite the precaution. The path to the barn, barely 15 yards from the cabin door, had nearly disappeared under fresh snow. Hannah forced her way through, using her shoulders to push aside the heaviest drifts. The animal's breath fogged in the lantern light as she forked fresh hay into their stalls. Betsy and Maud, the brown and white Guernsey cows that had been her wedding gift from her father to a marriage that never happened, lowed softly in recognition. Samson, the sturdy buckskin gelding, nuzzled her pocket for the dried apple slices she always carried. "Just a bit longer," she murmured, her voice nearly lost in the wind's assault. "Spring always comes." She stroked Samson's velvet nose, remembering how her father had ridden him into town for supplies 3 summers ago, and returned with a fever that consumed him in less than a week. Doc Wilson had made the journey from Fort Kearney, but arrived too late, just another victim of the unforgiving distance between settlements. Hannah had dug the grave herself, the August sun baking her neck as sweat and tears mingled on her cheeks. She wasn't certain she believed in spring anymore. Something about this storm felt different, more personal, as if it had come specifically to test her resolve to remain on this land that had already taken so much. The neighbors who had helped raise her cabin were gone now. The Thompsons had returned east after losing their youngest to diphtheria, and old man Jessup had moved to town when his arthritis made farming impossible. Her nearest neighbor was now the widower Ellis, 5 miles to the south, who had offered marriage 3 times with increasing desperation. Hannah had declined with equal persistence. Freedom, even in loneliness, was preferable to the alternative she'd seen in Ellis's cold eyes. As Hannah secured the barn door with a length of rope, the latch had broken weeks earlier, and the replacement iron wouldn't arrive until the spring peddler made his rounds. A sound penetrated the storm's wail. Not the wind, but something higher-pitched, human-like. She froze, one hand on the rough-planed door, the other clutching her father's old Navy Colt revolver that never left her side. The weapon had been his prize from the war between the states, where he'd served as a lieutenant in the Union Army. He'd taught Hannah to shoot when she was 12, making her promise to practice until she could hit a can at 20 paces without thinking. A woman alone needs to be twice as dangerous as a man, he'd told her. She had kept that promise, though the ammunition was expensive and hard to come by this far from town. The sound came again, a thin, reedy cry that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "Who's there?" Hannah called, but her words scattered in the gale. The bitter wind snatched her voice away, carrying it across the empty prairie where no one would hear. Hannah had learned long ago that, out here, help rarely came when called. The revolver felt heavy in her hand as she thumbed back the hammer, a reassuring click barely audible above the storm. The cry continued, and Hannah lifted her lantern higher, squinting against the stinging ice crystals that pelted her face. Near the corner of the barn, half buried in snow, lay a small bundle wrapped in what appeared to be buckskin and rabbit fur. Hannah approached cautiously, her boots crunching through the crust of ice forming atop the fresh snow. 2 years prior, the Johnson family 10 miles east had been lured outside by cries for help, only to be slaughtered when they opened their door. The memory of their burnt-out cabin and what remained of them afterward still visited her nightmares. The territorial newspaper had painted it as another savage attack, using language that made Hannah's stomach turn, remembering her mother's face as she'd taught her that hate only bred more hate. But fear was a different creature entirely, and Hannah had seen enough of the frontier's brutality to keep her pistol ready. But as she drew closer, the bundle moved. Hannah knelt and brushed away the accumulating snow to reveal the copper-skinned face of an infant, no more than a few months old, its dark eyes wide with cold and hunger. "Dear God," she whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. Hannah knew instantly the child was Comanche. The tribe had been forced south into reservations years earlier, but small bands still moved through the territory occasionally, shadows passing in the night. White settlers spoke of them in hushed, fearful tones. Many had lost family to raids in earlier years. Hannah herself had witnessed her mother's death at the hands of raiders when she was just 14, before they'd moved west from Kansas. The memory came unbidden. Her mother's scream as the arrow struck her chest, her father's rage as he fired shot after shot from the cabin window. Later, her father had identified their attackers as Kiowa, not Comanche, but to most settlers, such distinctions meant little in their grief and fear. The hate that had simmered in her chest for years rose up like bile. But then the baby coughed weakly, its small body trembling with cold, and something in Hannah's heart shifted. This was not a warrior or raider. This was a child, abandoned or lost, as helpless as she'd been when her mother fell. Without another thought, she tucked the bundle inside her coat and ran for the cabin, the wind at her back like the hand of God propelling her forward. Once, she slipped on ice hidden beneath the snow, nearly falling. The revolver discharged with a crack that was swallowed by the storm, the bullet disappearing harmlessly into the whiteout. Hannah righted herself, heart pounding, and continued on, clutching the infant tightly against her chest. Inside, Hannah unwrapped the child by the fire's light. A boy, thin but seemingly unharmed, wrapped in layers of rabbit fur and a finely tanned deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that told a story she couldn't read. Around his neck hung a small medicine pouch on a leather cord. His skin was the color of burnished copper, his eyes like polished obsidian, his hair as black as a crow's wing. "Who would leave you?" she whispered, warming a cloth to clean his face. The baby regarded her with surprising calm now that he was warm, as if he'd expected to be found all along. Hannah checked him for injuries, but found none. Only the lingering chill of exposure. His wrappings were of fine quality. This was no unwanted child, but one who had been cared for, valued. Fear crept along Hannah's spine as she considered the possibilities. Was this a trap? Would warriors come for her in the night, or was the child abandoned, left to die in the storm? Neither seemed likely. The Comanche were known to value their children above all else. Hannah heated water and mixed it with the precious canned milk she'd been saving for Sunday coffee. She fed the infant warmed milk from a spoon, which he took eagerly, his tiny hands reaching for the utensil. As the night deepened and the storm raged, she paced the cabin's single room, the revolver on the table within reach, the child against her shoulder. Every creak of the cabin's timbers, every howl of the wind made her jump, expecting warriors to materialize from the blizzard. "I'll call you Samuel," she told him, remembering the biblical tale of the boy left at the temple, "just until we sort this out." She hummed her mother's favorite hymn, Amazing Grace, as she rocked him, wondering if his own mother had sung to him in a language Hannah would never understand. That night, Hannah slept in her rocking chair, the infant nestled against her chest, one hand on her gun, listening for hoofbeats that never came. In her dreams, her mother stood at the edge of a great prairie, beckoning her forward, and when Hannah looked down, the child in her arms had become a bridge, spanning a chasm between two worlds. Morning brought no respite from the storm. Hannah's muscles ached from the awkward sleeping position, but Samuel had made it through the night, his breathing steady and strong. She tended her animals, carrying Samuel wrapped against her body beneath her coat, fighting through snow that now reached her thighs in places. Betsy seemed unbothered by the stranger's scent as Hannah milked her with one arm, the baby secured in a sling fashioned from a shawl. Back in the cabin, she reinforced the door with the sturdy oak beam she kept for emergencies, checked her meager supplies, and counted the cartridges for her revolver. 5 now, not nearly enough if trouble came. Her father's rifle had more ammunition, but the revolver was easier to handle while caring for an infant. Hannah inventoried her food stores, flour, beans, salt pork, dried apples, and the vegetables in the root cellar. Enough for weeks if she was careful, but the milk for Samuel would run low within days. She would have to supplement with broth if the storm continued. By the third day, the blizzard still imprisoned them, and Hannah's fear had transformed into a strange resignation. Her initial panic had given way to a routine, feeding Samuel, tending the animals, keeping the fire stoked, melting snow for water. She found herself talking to the child as she worked, telling him stories of her life before the frontier. Each night, she told Samuel stories as she fed him about her childhood in Ohio, her mother's garden in Kansas before the raid, her father's quiet determination to build a new life. She described the ocean she'd never seen but had read about in her books, and the cities with buildings taller than trees. "I hated them for years," she confessed to the infant as he stared up at her from his makeshift cradle, a wooden crate lined with her spare dress. "Your people. But hatred is a poor companion on cold nights." She touched the medicine pouch at his neck. "I wonder what your mother called you. I wonder if she's looking for you now." On the 4th day, Hannah fashioned proper diapers from old flannel and built a sturdier cradle from a drawer removed from her dresser. Samuel seemed to be thriving despite his ordeal, his copper skin warm to the touch, his grip strong when he clutched her finger. She found herself singing more often, songs she'd almost forgotten from her own childhood. It was on this day that Hannah noticed a small tattoo on the baby's shoulder, 3 blue dots in a triangle pattern. She'd heard that some tribes marked their children, especially those of important families. Was Samuel the son of a chief? The thought brought fresh worry. If he was valuable to his people, they would come for him, storm or no storm. That night, as the wind finally began to die down, Hannah opened her mother's Bible for the first time in years. She had blamed God for taking both her parents, for the loneliness of her existence, for the cruelty of the land. But as she read by candlelight, Samuel sleeping peacefully beside her, she felt something unclench in her chest, not forgiveness perhaps, but acceptance. The child had brought something into her life besides fear, a purpose beyond mere survival. On the fifth day, Hannah woke to silence. The wind had died overnight, and sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, reflecting blindingly off the snow. Hannah opened her door to find the world transformed into a wilderness of white unbroken, except for the path she'd maintained to the barn. The sky arched overhead, a perfect blue so intense it hurt to look at it. The storm had scoured the world clean, leaving nothing but pristine snow and silence so complete Hannah could hear her own heartbeat. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. As the day progressed, Hannah worked to clear snow from around her cabin and barn. The drifts against the north wall reached past the window, and she had to tunnel through them to create a path. The physical labor felt good after days of confinement, though she kept Samuel close, wrapped in her shawl and secured to her chest. His dark eyes watched her work with what seemed like curiosity, his small face the only part of him visible in his woolen cocoon. She hung her blankets outside to air, and for the first time she bathed Samuel properly, marveling at his perfect small fingers and toes. The beaded pouch still hung around his neck, and Hannah wondered what it contained but respected whatever medicine or charm it might hold. His black hair, when washed, shone like a raven's wing in the winter sun. In the afternoon, Hannah climbed to the roof to clear away snow that might collapse the structure with its weight. From this vantage point, she could see for miles across the unbroken white of the prairie. No smoke from neighboring chimneys, no movement of man or beast, just the endless expanse of snow beneath the cold blue sky. She was about to descend when a flicker of movement caught her eye on the far horizon. Shading her eyes against the glare, Hannah froze. Dark shapes moved across the snow-covered prairie, their approach silent and inexorable from the south. Riders. Many riders. Hannah scrambled down the ladder, heart pounding. She counted as they appeared over the rise. 20, 40, 60. More, nearly 100 mounted warriors, their hair long and loose, their bodies wrapped in buffalo robes against the cold. Some carried lances tipped with feathers, others had rifles cradled across their saddles. They moved in formation, with the discipline of an army. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as she retreated inside, grabbing Samuel and her revolver. 6 bullets against a war party. A fool's odds. She considered running, but where? The nearest settlement was 15 miles away, and she would leave tracks in the snow as clear as a road map. The barn, no better than a trap. She glanced at her father's rifle on the wall. 7 more shots if she could reload fast enough. Through the window she watched their approach. They formed a great semicircle around her homestead, but didn't charge. Instead, a single rider moved forward. An older man, his face deeply lined, his hair streaked with gray. Unlike the others, he wore a military jacket. Incongruous among the traditional dress, a medal glinted on his chest. American, by the look of it, a scout or interpreter perhaps, who had served with the U.S. cavalry at some point. Hannah knew then that there would be no escape, no rescue. She had one choice that might preserve some dignity in death. Wrapping Samuel warmly, she stepped outside into the snow, the child in one arm, her revolver visible in her other hand, but pointed downward. The old warrior halted his pony 20 paces from her door. For a long moment he studied her. Then he spoke in surprisingly clear English. "You have something that belongs to us." Hannah swallowed hard. "This child was left near my barn 5 nights ago during the blizzard. I've cared for him as best I could." Her voice sounded stronger than she felt, carrying across the snow-covered yard. "Why would you take him?" the man asked, his expression unreadable. Many white women would have left him to the cold. "I'm not many women," Hannah replied. her voice steadier than she felt. No child deserves to die alone in the snow. She thought of her own losses, of the graves she'd dug, of promises broken and dreams deferred. I would hope someone would do the same for any child, regardless of who they are. The warrior dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who had spent his life on horseback. He approached slowly, stopping just out of arm's reach. Up close, Hannah could see the years etched in his face, the wisdom in his eyes, and the scars that spoke of many battles. He wore his hair in 2 long braids decorated with beads and feathers, and beneath his military jacket was a shirt adorned with porcupine quillwork of intricate design. I am Gray Wolf, son of Buffalo Horn. The boy's mother is my daughter, Eagle Feather. Hannah felt lightheaded with fear, but forced herself to ask, why was he left here? Alone in a storm? She couldn't keep the accusation from her voice. A flicker of something, perhaps respect, crossed Gray Wolf's weathered face. My daughter was returning from a sacred journey with the child when the storm came. Her horse fell crossing the creek north of here, breaking her leg beneath it. She crawled through the snow, carrying her son until she could go no further. He gestured to the distant riders. She saw your smoke and knew her only hope was to leave him where you might find him. She marked your door that night with her blood, a plea to our ancestors to watch over her son until we could reach him. For the first time, Hannah noticed the rust-colored smear on her doorframe that she'd assumed was her own, from a cut suffered while repairing the roof. She touched it with trembling fingers, imagining a mother's desperate act to save her child. Eagle Feather crawled back to the creek. Gray Wolf continued, his voice softening. Our hunting party found her half frozen the next day. Her first words were of her son and the white woman's cabin. We waited for the storm to pass to come for him. Hannah looked down at Samuel. No, not Samuel, she corrected herself. The child had his own name, his own people. The bundle in her arms suddenly felt heavier with the weight of its significance. What is his name? She asked, her throat tight. He is called Little Coyote, Gray Wolf answered. His mother lives but is weak. We have traveled 3 days to find him. Hannah nodded slowly, then held the child out to Gray Wolf. The old warrior took him with gentle hands, examining him carefully before tucking him into his own coat. You kept him warm, Gray Wolf observed. Fed him, protected him. His dark eyes held hers, searching. Any decent person would have done the same, Hannah said, though she knew this wasn't necessarily true. Not in this territory, where bloodshed had created deep wounds on both sides. Gray Wolf studied her for a long moment. No, many would not. His gaze flicked to the revolver still in her hand. You were prepared to defend him, against your own kind, if necessary. Hannah hadn't considered this, but realized it was true. If someone had threatened the child, anyone, she would have fought. She nodded once, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Gray Wolf turned and whistled sharply. From among the mounted warriors, a woman rode forward. Even from a distance, Hannah could see she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and a regal bearing despite the buffalo robe wrapped around her shoulders and the visible bandages on her leg. Her hair hung in a single thick braid adorned with silver beads, and her face, though marked by recent suffering, held strength that transcended pain. She carried a long bundle wrapped in painted hide. The woman, Eagle Feather, Hannah presumed, spoke rapidly in her native tongue as Gray Wolf handed her the child. Her face transformed with joy as she clutched Little Coyote to her breast, tears streaming down her cheeks. She kissed his face, his hands, murmuring words Hannah couldn't understand but whose meaning was universal, a mother's love reclaimed. After a moment, Eagle Feather looked directly at Hannah. Her eyes, so like her son's, held no hatred, only gratitude. She spoke again to Gray Wolf, who nodded. My daughter says you have the heart of a Comanche mother, Gray Wolf translated. She asks that you accept this gift. Eagle Feather handed the bundle to Gray Wolf, who presented it to Hannah. Hesitantly, Hannah unwrapped it to find a finely crafted rifle with silver inlay along its barrel and stock. The workmanship was extraordinary, far superior to any weapon she'd seen in the general store or even in the Army officers' quarters at Fort Kearny. This belonged to her husband, who was killed by soldiers last summer, Gray Wolf explained. She says you will need it more than we do now. 6 bullets are not enough for a woman alone on the frontier. Hannah accepted the gift with trembling hands, recognizing its value both practical and symbolic. Thank you. Tell her. Tell her I'm grateful. Her son found his way back to her. Eagle Feather spoke again, her voice musical despite the foreign tongue. She says the child was always meant to find you. Gray Wolf translated. Our shaman saw it in a vision before Little Coyote was born, that he would be a bridge between our peoples. This is why she named him Little Coyote, after the trickster who moves between worlds. Hannah looked at the child, now contentedly nestled against his mother's chest, and wondered at the strange workings of fate that had brought them together during the storm. She thought of her mother's words long ago. God's ways are not our ways, child. Sometimes the path makes no sense until you've walked it. Gray Wolf nodded once, then turned to leave. Wait, Hannah called. Will your people return here? The old warrior paused, considering her question. The winter sun cast his shadow long across the pristine snow, connecting him to Hannah like a bridge. The white man's government restricts our movements more each season. The reservations grow smaller, the buffalo fewer. We travel north now to join relatives among the northern Cheyenne, but we will remember this place. He pointed to the cabin with a weathered hand. My people have marked your home.